In the last 2 years, I've had a pretty radical shift in how I've thought and approached color grading when it comes to films, and I want to walk you through that today. Now, if you're anything like me, when you first opened up maybe your editing program and started messing around with color grading, you started at the first shot and tried to make it look good, and you kept going through the project shot by shot, doing your best to make it look as good as possible. Now, the problem with this approach is, although you can make each shot look good, when you watch it as a whole, usually it looks inconsistent on a shot-to-shot basis. There's no through line of color. And my world was really flipped around one day when I was listening to Walter Valprado, who did The Last Jedi, Dunkirk, among a bunch of other films. He was talking about, why are we starting on a shot-to-shot basis when it comes to films? Zoom back and say, what do we want to be true over the course of this film? Start developing those building blocks. Then say, underneath that, what are the nuances that each scene will have? And then there, treat each shot individually. I want to show you how this works itself out practically, so let's jump into the film. So let's talk about how we developed these core building blocks for this feature. Now, up here we have the final building blocks, but I want to show you kind of how they were developed. So the first thing that we looked at was the overall contrast curve. So I'm gonna just say the curve of the piece here. Now, what we did is we started off by taking the saturation down to 0 so we could just look at a black and white image. And from there, we started experimenting. So we started taking the lift here. You'll see we bring the lift down, and I'm gonna go a little too much for the moment, but you'll see we'll bring that back. And then we'll take the gain here and we'll crank it up, increasing our linear contrast, probably something about there. And now what I start doing is looking at different shots from different scenes and say, how does this feel? Does this contrast feel right? Does it need any tweaking? As I'm looking at it, I'm thinking it's good, but some of the black elements, they might need to be raised slightly. Another way we could visualize this is with a ramp, all right? So you can see all these different steps. If you look at the scopes down here, so you can see what our curve currently looks like. Now, I think what I'm gonna wanna do to this is to help preserve some of those shadows, I'm going to add a nice little toe here, and then also a nice little highlight roll off here, probably right about there. Let's see how that's looking in our images. All right, pretty decent contrast. On the darkest elements, we still have detail. We're not losing detail. I back it off slightly. As I click through different moments from the film, contrast is looking good, and it looks like we're not losing any detail. So now we can get rid of the black and white node and see what our curve looks like. Now let me just go to the curve we ended up using for the project. It's very similar, just a little more refined. The color doesn't seem to be very saturated, and that's simply because we're still in red's wide color space. So the way we fix that is by doing a color space transform from the red wide gamut into Rec 709, and boom, there we go. All of a sudden we have footage that is looking more correct, you might say. Footage that is looking more what you anticipate it to be. Now, when it comes to adding a little bit of a look, another one of those building blocks we wanted to add was a bit of a Kodak film stock look, specifically when it comes to cooling off the shadows. So this third building block is starting to cool off some of the mid and shadow tones. It's probably easier if I show you here on this little step chart. You'll see as I enable and disable, you'll see the cooling is happening, especially in this lower third of the visual range. So it's not really, we're not tinting black, and middle gray is staying very close, but it's these things just below middle gray, and it doesn't really affect our black point. The final building block here is not something that you'll see on most clips, but there are a couple scenes in the film where we get a really potent, strong red in the scene. And one of the problems that we find with digital sensors is often when we get a red color, it starts to lean a little magenta. So this right here, as you'll see as I'll enable it, it's starting to bring the red towards a more primary red, or maybe a little bit more of an orangey red. If you look on the vector scope here, you'll see without it, it kind of skews towards magenta, but with it, it lands rock solid on that red line. So there we have our 4 core building blocks. We have our curve, we have our color space adjustment, we have a bit of a Kodak film emulation, and then a tweak for highly saturated reds. So let's take a look at the scene at the school lockers. Now, although these are 2 separate clips, they are grouped together. So if we go to our group post clip, we can apply a scene-wide adjustment that will equally apply itself across the scenes. So one of the things we knew we wanted in this scene is a touch more contrast and also to cool it off a little. So let me enable this for you. So do you see how we're doing that? We're adding a touch more contrast and then cooling it off a bit. And because it's in the group post clip, it applies to both sides. Do you see that? we are getting that grade applied consistently between the two. Now, what's totally crazy is at this point, we still have not yet touched any individual clips, and yet we have a really good looking image. This is the power of starting from strong building blocks, then moving to each individual scene, and then tweaking clips. So let's look at our individual tweaks for this shot. Now, although there are a lot of nodes here, this is just a standard node tree, I'm really not using very many of them. Really what we're doing is we're just focusing the light. You see how we're kind of bringing down the left side of the frame, slightly increasing contrast interface. This is a shot-specific adjustment, but very little is actually happening on this individual shot. That is the beauty of looking at a film horizontally, like we're talking about. So here's a scene on the sidewalk here. Now you'll notice that our 4 building blocks are already enabled and they're getting us into a really good spot. But the question is, what is unique about this scene? Well, wanted a little more warmth to it and a slight tweak of exactly how much contrast we're looking for. But that is our scene-wide tweak. And then on this individual shot, we're doing things like, bringing down the sides of the frame, increasing the contrast on the face, and just helping finesse this shot individually. And here's the cool thing. I can skip between different scenes in the film, and yet they still feel aesthetically consistent because we concentrated on building good core building blocks. Well, there you go, a behind the scenes of They Don't Cast Shadows. If you like this video, feel free to hit the like button, and I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Also, if you don't want to miss future videos, subscribe button, notification bell, and you will get them. All right, bye friend.